Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist, your cozy corner of curiosity where science comes with a side of serenity. Whether you're winding down after a long day, tucked under blankets with your phone propped against a pillow, or simply letting your mind float gently towards sleep, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we're setting our sights on the sky, exploring the science of flight. From the delicate flap of a hummingbird's wings to the thunderous roar of rocket engines, this is the story of how creatures and machines have learned to lift off, stay up, and sometimes soar to the stars. Now, I must confess, I do hope this video isn't too fascinating. After all, the goal is to help you drift off peacefully. But if you do find yourself wide-eyed at the wonder of the lift and thrust, well, at least you'll be wide-eyed and a little wiser. Before we take off, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Feel free to leave a comment and say hello. It's always such a joy to see this sleepy little community stretch across time zones and continents. If you find comfort in videos like this, equal parts knowledge and calm, a gentle tap on the like button or a quiet subscribe helps more than you know. It's a small action that supports hours of research, writing, and a whole lot of softly whispered wonder. And just before we begin, a quick reminder. While this video is full of interesting science, it's not medical advice. If you're struggling with sleep regularly, it's always best to speak to a qualified professional. This video is here to relax, not to replace care. Alright, let's settle in, take a breath, and begin our gentle journey into the science of flight. Birds make flight look effortless. A gentle leap, a few flaps, and suddenly they're riding the breeze like they were born to be there, which of course they were. But the reality of bird flight is anything but simple. It's the result of millions of years of evolution, finely tuned mechanics, and some clever tricks from nature's engineering department. What looks like a graceful glide is really a masterclass in physics, biology, and design. To understand how birds fly, we need to start with the basics of their anatomy. Birds are essentially living, breathing flight machines. Every part of their body has been shaped, over time, to serve one primary purpose: staying in the air. The most obvious feature, of course, is the wing. But a bird's ability to fly isn't just about having wings. It's about how those wings work in concert with the rest of the body. Bird wings are built around a modified forelimb not unlike a human arm. They have a humerus, radius, and ulna, familiar names if you've ever taken a tumble and ended up with an X-ray. These bones are elongated and reshaped to support feathers and muscle, allowing birds to maneuver through the air with surprising agility. The structure is both strong and incredibly light, made possible by bones that are hollow, yet reinforced with internal struts. This means birds can have large, sturdy wings without being weighed down. And then there are the feathers, marvels in their own right. Flight feathers are asymmetrical, with a strong central shaft and veins that lock together using microscopic hooks, like a natural zipper. These feathers can flex and twist, controlling airflow and lift with remarkable precision. The overall shape of the wing, known as an airfoil, is curved on top and flatter underneath. This design helps generate lift as air moves faster over the curved top, creating lower pressure and gently pulling the bird upward. It's the same principle that helps airplane wings get off the ground. But birds don't just flap their wings randomly and hope for the best. There's a rhythm to it. During the downstroke, powerful chest muscles contract, pushing the wings down and forward to generate thrust. On the upstroke, smaller muscles help lift the wings while minimizing resistance by partially folding them. This coordinated motion allows birds to maintain forward momentum and stay aloft. In some species, this cycle happens in the blink of an eye. Hummingbirds, for example, beat their wings up to 80 times per second, hovering in place with astonishing control. Of course, not all birds fly the same way. A hawk soaring over a field uses long, broad wings to ride thermal currents, conserving energy as it searches for prey. In contrast, a sparrow flits from bush to bush using quick, choppy strokes for agility in tight spaces. Penguins, though technically birds, have traded aerial flight for swimming, their wings evolving into flippers suited for slicing through water rather than air. Ostriches and emus gave up flight entirely, opting for powerful legs and fast running over the complexities of aerial navigation. Evolution, it seems, is more concerned with survival than style points. Even among flying birds, wing shape tells us a great deal about lifestyle. Birds with long, narrow wings, like albatrosses, are built for gliding over open oceans, traveling thousands of miles with barely a flap. Birds with shorter, rounded wings, like pheasants or grouse, are designed for quick takeoffs and short bursts of speed, often to escape predators in dense forests. Falcons, the sprinters of the sky, have pointed wings that allow for high-speed dives, reaching over 200 miles per hour when hunting. Body weight plays a role too. Smaller birds have a higher wing loading, that is, more body weight per unit of wing area, and must flap more frequently to stay airborne. Larger birds, like eagles or storks, rely more on soaring, letting rising air currents do the heavy lifting. To assist with this, many large birds have evolved what's known as a slotting effect, spreading their primary feathers like fingers to reduce turbulence and maintain lift during slow flight or gliding. And we can't talk about flight without mentioning the tail. A bird's tail is more than just decorative plumage. It acts like a rudder, helping with balance, steering, and braking. During flight, tail feathers fan out or close tightly depending on what the bird needs. When landing, many birds spread their tails wide to increase drag and slow down gently. When changing direction, subtle movements in tail position help fine-tune their path through the air, but even the most beautifully designed wings and tails would be useless without the right power source. Birds have enormous breast muscles, especially the pectoralis major, which can make up more than 1/5 of their body weight. These muscles attach to a large keeled sternum unique to birds, providing a broad surface for muscle attachment and enhancing the strength of the downstroke. It's a powerhouse setup, and it explains why flightless birds which lack this keel can't take to the skies. Internal systems support this high-energy lifestyle too. Birds have incredibly efficient respiratory systems. Unlike mammals, which breathe in and out using lungs that expand and contract, birds use a unidirectional airflow system. Air sacs throughout their body keep fresh oxygen moving in a continuous loop, allowing for more efficient gas exchange even during intense activity like flapping or climbing. Their hearts are proportionally larger than those of mammals, and their metabolic rates are sky-high, everything geared toward fueling the demanding act of flight. Even their vision plays a role. Birds need precise visual cues to navigate, hunt, and avoid obstacles in flight. Many species have excellent depth perception, color vision that extends into the ultraviolet range, and faster visual processing speeds than humans. Their eyes are large, often taking up a significant portion of their head, and they're incredibly specialized depending on lifestyle. Owls, for instance, are optimized for low-light hunting, while hawks can spot a mouse from hundreds of feet in the air. What emerges from all this is a portrait of remarkable biological engineering. Flight in birds isn't the result of a single adaptation, it's a symphony of structures and systems working together. From skeletal lightness to feathered aerodynamics, from muscular power to efficient breathing, every detail has evolved to serve a purpose in the air. It's not magic, it's science. But sometimes, when you see a gull tracing lazy loops over the waves or a swallow diving through summer air like a living dart, it feels like the closest thing to magic nature ever invented. Insects were the first creatures on Earth to master the skies. Long before birds took wing or humans built machines to chase the clouds, insects were already buzzing through prehistoric air, experimenting with flight in all its strange and miniature glory. And make no mistake, it is strange. In fact, insect flight is so unusual that when scientists first tried to model it using classical aerodynamics, the math flat out refused to cooperate. According to the equations, some of these tiny creatures shouldn't be able to fly at all, but fly they do, beautifully, erratically, and sometimes with the elegance of a drunken ballet. Take the humble bumblebee, for instance. For years, people repeated the old myth that bumblebee flight was impossible under the laws of physics. That's not quite true, of course. It just doesn't follow the same rules as airplanes or even birds. Bumblebees don't rely on steady, smooth airflow over their wings. Instead, they beat their wings rapidly, creating unsteady vortices, tiny tornadoes of air that generate lift in ways we're only beginning to fully understand. It's not graceful, but it works. One of the key differences between birds and insects lies in how their wings are attached and controlled. Birds flap using muscles that move their entire limb. Insects, on the other hand, flap their wings by vibrating their thorax, the middle segment of their body. Their wings are attached indirectly, and it's this indirect muscle control that allows some species to flap at astonishing speeds. Houseflies, for example, can beat their wings around 200 times per second. That's not a typo. 200 times every second, all while maintaining stable flight and dodging swats with ninja-like reflexes. Insects also tend to have multiple pairs of wings. Dragonflies, for example, have 2 pairs that can operate independently. This gives them a stunning degree of control. They can hover, glide, dart sideways, and even fly backward. Their wings aren't synchronized like a bird's. They're more like 2 sets of oars on a rowing boat, giving precise control over lift and thrust. Watching a dragonfly maneuver is like watching a helicopter with a doctorate in dance. Butterflies offer a different case entirely. Their flight is a bit clumsy looking, a gentle flutter more than a buzz or zip, but that fluttering has a purpose. The irregular wing beats help them stay unpredictable in the air, making it harder for predators to track their path. Butterflies also use their large, broad wings to absorb sunlight, warming up their bodies to the right temperature before takeoff. For them, flight isn't just a means of travel, it's a vital part of their thermoregulation. Then there are moths, the night shift of the insect aviation world. Some moths, like the hawk moth, are surprisingly powerful flyers. In fact, the hummingbird hawk moth is so agile and precise that it's often mistaken for an actual hummingbird. It hovers in front of flowers, sipping nectar with a long, coiled tongue, all while maintaining rock-steady mid-air control. One of the reasons insects can get away with such aerobatic trickery is their size. At such small scales, air behaves differently. It's thicker, stickier, more like flying through syrup than the thin, breezy stuff humans are used to. This means insects experience a different set of aerodynamic forces. They rely heavily on what's known as unsteady aerodynamics, where the motion of the wing creates complex patterns of air movement that aren't captured by traditional lift equations. Insects also exploit something called delayed stall. When a bird or a plane tilts its wing too far, airflow separates and lift is lost. But insects flap their wings so quickly that the airflow doesn't have time to separate in the usual way. Instead, a vortex forms along the leading edge of the wing, sticking to it and pulling the insect upward. It's a bit like surfing on your own personal whirlpool. Another important trick is rotational lift. At the end of each wing beat, many insects rotate their wings, producing an extra boost of lift through the swirling motion of air. Add to that a phenomenon called wake capture, where a wing moving backward reuses the energy from the previous downstroke, and you get a complex, multi-layered system of flight that breaks the mold of what we normally think of as aerodynamic. Despite their mechanical genius, insect wings are astonishingly delicate. Made of a thin membrane supported by a network of veins, they're more like stained glass than aircraft components. Yet these wings can endure thousands upon thousands of flaps. In some species, wing wear becomes visible over time, ragged edges, tiny tears. But many insects continue flying undeterred, their resilience outpacing their fragility. The variety in insect wings is dazzling. Some are short and stubby, others long and ribbon-like. Some shimmer with iridescence, like those of certain beetles and flies. Others are nearly invisible in motion, like the transparent blades of a gnat. Insects don't just fly, they dazzle, confuse, and occasionally terrify, especially if you've ever been buzzed by a cicada on a warm summer evening. And then there are mayflies, whose adult life is so fleeting they barely get a chance to fly at all. Some species live less than a day in their winged form, yet they still take to the skies, driven by instinct to find a mate before the clock runs out. Their brief flights are a reminder that even the most temporary moments in nature can be full of grace. While the physics of insect flight may seem chaotic, it's rooted in biological innovation. Their nervous systems are wired for rapid response, with lightning-fast feedback loops that allow for incredible agility. A fruit fly can change direction in less than 1/100th of a second. That's faster than most humans can blink. This high-speed processing gives them a level of maneuverability that human pilots can only dream of. Of course, insects aren't perfect flyers. They can be blown off course by gusts of wind, lose control when injured, or fumble their landings. But what they lack in predictability, they make up for in adaptability. Insects have conquered every continent and climate on Earth, from tropical forests to frozen tundras, thanks in part to their airborne capabilities. Some even migrate across oceans. The globe skimmer dragonfly, for example, travels thousands of miles between continents, crossing open water in a journey that seems utterly improbable for something with a wingspan shorter than a pencil. In a world built for giants, insects remind us that size isn't everything. They fly not with brute strength, but with finesse, not with rigid rules, but with improvisation. They are nature's aerial improvisers, buzzing to a rhythm all their own, and in their fluttering, zipping, hovering chaos, there is beauty. A kind of miniature marvel that makes the sky feel a little more alive. When we think of flying creatures, birds and insects usually come to mind first, but mammals, ever the overachievers, have found their own way into the skies. And while they may not have feathers or iridescent wings, they've evolved some impressive tools for getting airborne. Among them, bats are the true masters of powered flight. Others, like flying squirrels and sugar gliders, have taken a different route, gliding from tree to tree using skin stretched like a living parachute. Either way, the sky's not exclusive to the feathered or the six-legged. Some mammals have claimed a slice of it for themselves. Let's begin with bats, because they're not just gliders pretending to fly, they're the real deal. Bats are the only mammals capable of true, sustained flight. That's not a marketing exaggeration, it's biological fact. They flap their wings, generate lift, and propel themselves through the air much like birds, but with a structure all their own. Where bird wings are modified arms with feathers, bat wings are more like incredibly long jazz hands wrapped in skin. Their wing membrane, called the patagium, stretches from the elongated fingers of their forelimbs all the way down to their hind legs, and sometimes even their tail. If you could look at a bat's wing in slow motion, it would seem more like a hand in a silk scarf than a bird's rigid flap. This setup gives bats a level of flight control that's surprisingly advanced. Their flexible wings allow for fine-tuned adjustments mid-air. They can bank sharply, hover, even backpedal. The skin of the patagium is loaded with sensory receptors that respond to airflow and tension, giving bats immediate feedback about their position and speed. It's like flying with touch-sensitive gloves that also happen to be part of your skeleton. Bat species vary widely in size and flight style. The tiny bumblebee bat, weighing less than a coin, flits through the air with quick, delicate wing beats. At the other end of the spectrum are the flying foxes or fruit bats, with wingspans that can stretch over 5 feet. These larger bats tend to glide more than flap, using long, slow wing beats to cruise through forests in search of fruit or nectar. Bats are also champions of nocturnal navigation. Since many species fly in complete darkness, they rely on echolocation to see their surroundings. By emitting high-frequency calls and listening to the echoes that bounce off nearby objects, bats can build a mental map of their environment in real time. It's not just for avoiding trees or catching bugs, it's also essential for landing on ceilings, locating roosts, and sometimes, impressively, finding mates. Echolocation isn't unique to bats, but they've taken it to extraordinary levels of precision. Some species can detect objects as fine as a human hair in the dark. They adjust the frequency, direction, and intensity of their calls depending on speed and surroundings. In fast-paced hunting situations, this acoustic ability becomes a kind of sonar ballet, one where the choreography is constantly improvised. Despite their talents, bats have historically had a bit of an image problem. Their nocturnal habits, leathery wings, and unfortunate associations with folklore haven't exactly won them universal admiration. But they're essential pollinators, pest controllers, and seed spreaders in many ecosystems. Without bats, tropical forests would lose some of their best gardeners, and summer evenings would be noticeably buggier. While bats took the powered flight route, other mammals decided that gliding was quite sufficient. Gliders don't flap. They launch, spread their limbs, and let gravity and air currents do the work. And if you've ever seen a flying squirrel drift from one tree to another under the moonlight, you'll know it's anything but clumsy. In fact, gliding mammals often look more like parachuting professionals than reluctant leapers. Flying squirrels, for example, have a skin membrane called the patagium too, but it stretches between their wrists and ankles. When they launch themselves into the air, they spread their limbs wide to catch the wind, steering with tiny shifts of their legs or tail. It's not flight in the powered sense, but it allows them to travel surprisingly long distances, sometimes over 100 feet, with minimal loss in altitude. That's a considerable achievement for a creature that could sit comfortably in a teacup. Their tails, large and fluffy, act like rudders in midair, helping stabilize the glide and control landing. Some species can even adjust the angle of their patagium mid-flight, changing their direction like a living hang glider. It's not as fast or as flexible as a bat's flight, but for crossing gaps in the forest canopy or escaping predators, it's incredibly effective. Sugar gliders, which hail from Australia and nearby regions, follow a similar pattern. These small, wide-eyed marsupials get their name from their love of sweet sap and their gliding prowess. They can launch from high branches, spread their limbs, and silently coast across open space to reach another tree. Like flying squirrels, they're not actually flying, but their control in the air is remarkable. They use their tail like a rudder and adjust limb positions to tweak their glide path with surprising precision. In Southeast Asia, colugos, sometimes called flying lemurs, though they're not lemurs and they don't truly fly, take gliding to a new level. Their patagium is the most extensive of any gliding mammal, stretching from neck to fingertips to toes and even to the tail. When they glide, it looks like a smooth, unbroken sheet of skin catches the air, allowing them to coast through the jungle with minimal effort. Though awkward climbers, colugos are graceful once airborne, covering distances up to 200 feet between trees. It's worth noting that gliding isn't limited to mammals. Some reptiles, amphibians, and even fish have evolved forms of gliding. But in mammals, it's a recurring theme, appearing independently in several evolutionary lineages. This suggests that gliding is a useful strategy for navigating the vertical world of forests, where staying above the ground can mean the difference between life and being lunch. The physics of gliding is simpler than powered flight, but no less elegant. It involves managing the descent, trading vertical drop for horizontal distance. The angle of the glide, the surface area of the patagium, body posture, and tail control all contribute to how far and how accurately the animal can travel. Many gliders launch from tall trees and use a shallow glide angle to maximize their reach. A good launch and a smart landing strategy are critical. There's no flapping for a second chance if things go wrong. Gliding also conserves energy. It allows animals to move efficiently between food sources or escape danger without expending the vast calories needed for powered flight. In dense forests, where trees are tall and ground travel can be risky, gliding offers a quiet, efficient way to stay mobile. Together, bats and gliding mammals represent two fascinating solutions to the same challenge: how to move through the air. One uses power and propulsion, the other uses grace and gravity. But both demonstrate that flight, in its many forms, isn't limited to feathers or jet engines. It's a possibility that nature keeps rediscovering, tweaking, and perfecting in different shapes and sizes. When night falls and the forests darken, these creatures take to the skies, silent, swift, and often unseen. Yet their presence is vital. Their movements a testament to the diversity of flight. Whether flapping through the darkness or gliding like a whisper on the wind, they remind us that the sky is open to more than one kind of traveler. Flying might look like magic, but it's really just a clever balancing act between four invisible forces. These are lift, thrust, drag, and gravity. Together, they create the delicate harmony that lets birds soar, planes cruise, and bees buzz through your garden without falling out of the sky like nature's confetti. Understanding how these forces work doesn't require a degree in physics, just a bit of curiosity and a willingness to imagine the air around you as something alive, something with shape and pressure and movement. Let's begin with gravity. It's the most familiar of the four forces, always there, always pulling you toward the ground, whether you're a person, a paper airplane, or a wandering balloon. Gravity doesn't care how aerodynamic you are or how much momentum you've built up. It's patient, persistent, and very consistent. For something to fly, it has to overcome this downward pull. That's where lift comes in. Lift is the upward force that counteracts gravity and keeps a flying object in the air. It's generated by the movement of air over a wing. The shape of a wing, curved on top and flatter underneath, is known as an airfoil. As air moves across the wing, it travels faster over the curved top surface and slower underneath. This difference in speed creates a difference in pressure. The air pressure on top is lower, and the pressure underneath is higher, effectively pushing the wing upward. That pushes lift. It's a bit like sticking your hand out the car window and feeling it rise and fall depending on the angle. Tilt your hand slightly, and the air pushes it upward. That's lift in action, and your hand is momentarily transformed into a mini wing. Birds, insects, and airplanes all rely on this same principle, though the details vary depending on wing shape, speed, and size. Next up is thrust. This is the forward force that propels a flying object through the air. Birds create thrust by flapping their wings. Planes use engines or propellers. Even insects, for all their chaotic flitting, are generating thrust with each wing beat. Without thrust, there's no forward motion, and without forward motion, there's no airflow over the wings, and therefore no lift. Thrust keeps things moving, and movement keeps things flying. But nothing moves through air without resistance. Enter drag. Drag is the force that pushes back against motion. It's caused by air molecules colliding with the surface of a moving object. Think of drag as the aerodynamic equivalent of walking through a swimming pool. It resists your movement, slows you down, and makes you work harder. In flight, drag pulls backward while thrust pushes forward. If thrust is greater than drag, you speed up. If drag is greater than thrust, you slow down. It's a constant tug of war. These four forces are always present in flight. Lift opposes gravity, thrust opposes drag. For stable, level flight, they must be balanced. If lift is greater than gravity, you climb. If gravity wins, you descend. If thrust overtakes drag, you accelerate. If drag gets the upper hand, you decelerate. Flying is really just managing the constant relationship between these four invisible players. What makes all this even more interesting is how these forces are affected by design. The angle at which a wing meets the air, the angle of attack, can increase or decrease lift. Too high, and you might stall. Too low, and you won't get enough lift to stay up. The size and shape of a wing also matter. Long, narrow wings are great for gliding, like those of albatrosses. Short, broad wings are better for quick bursts of speed and maneuverability, as seen in sparrows or fighter jets. Airspeed is another crucial factor. The faster you move, the more air flows over the wings, and the more lift you generate. That's why planes need a runway to build up speed before takeoff. Birds often do something similar, flapping rapidly or jumping from a perch to generate the speed needed to lift off. In both cases, the goal is the same: create enough lift to break free of gravity's grip. Interestingly, some flying creatures and aircraft also rely on their shape to reduce drag. Streamlined bodies allow air to flow smoothly around them. Think of how a falcon's body narrows into a sleek point during a dive, or how a commercial jet curves gently from nose to tail. These shapes help air slide by with less resistance, improving efficiency and speed. Lift and drag aren't just abstract concepts. They're physically tangible in the way wings behave. As air moves over a wing, it doesn't simply split and rejoin on the other side. Instead, it becomes a swirling, shifting dance of particles, especially at the edges of wings and during maneuvers. Insects and birds can manipulate this airflow to generate additional lift, sometimes even during the upstroke of a wing beat. It's not just about flapping. It's about sculpting the air into something that works for you. Now, while the Bernoulli principle often gets credit for explaining lift, faster air over the top equals lower pressure, it's only part of the story. Newton's third law also plays a role. As the wing pushes air downward, the air pushes back upward. Lift happens not only because of pressure differences, but also because wings redirect air and react to the resulting forces. In truth, both principles work together, and the full explanation of lift is a bit more complex than either theory alone. What's beautiful about all this is that despite the technical details, the experience of flight remains something almost dreamlike. It's the careful balance of these four invisible forces that allows birds to float on thermals, lets gliders trace lazy arcs across the sky, and enables jumbo jets to rise from runways and vanish into the clouds. Each flight is a triumph of physics and engineering, or evolution, made possible by a continuous negotiation between lift, gravity, thrust, and drag. Even the quietest glide involves this invisible push and pull. The world may seem still from a bird's eye view, but below the surface the air is alive with forces working in harmony to keep things aloft. Understanding them doesn't take away the wonder. If anything, it adds to it. Because once you know what's really happening up there, how every flap, tilt and curve shapes the air, you can't help but feel a little awed by it all. Flight isn't just about defying gravity. It's about mastering the air, dancing with it, listening to it, and trusting it to hold you up. In that sense, flying is both a science and an art. And whether it's a bumblebee, a hang glider, or a falcon in full dive, it's always the same delicate game, pushing against the pull of the earth, with just enough grace to stay above it. Gliding is one of nature's most elegant solutions to the problem of getting from point A to point B without walking, running or flapping like your life depends on it. It's not quite flying in the powered sense. There are no engines roaring or wings flapping furiously, but it is flight nonetheless. It's flight's quieter cousin, the one that doesn't shout or strain, but instead slips through the air with minimal fuss, relying on gravity, wind, and a well-shaped body to keep moving forward. At its core, gliding is controlled falling. Gravity is always pulling things down, but gliders, whether they're animals or aircraft, have learned to use that pull to their advantage. Rather than tumbling straight to the ground, a glider tilts itself into the air, trading vertical descent for horizontal travel. The steeper the angle, the faster it falls. The shallower the angle, the farther it goes. With the right conditions, gliders can stay airborne for impressive distances and durations, all without flapping a single wing or burning a drop of fuel. Birds are some of the most skilled gliders in the animal kingdom. Take the albatross, for instance. With wingspans that can exceed 11 feet, these seabirds are the undisputed champions of long-distance gliding. They spend most of their lives soaring over the open ocean, sometimes covering thousands of miles without landing. What makes them so efficient is a technique called dynamic soaring. They harness the difference in wind speeds at various altitudes by climbing into fast-moving air and then diving into slower-moving air, gaining energy from the gradient like a surfer catching a perfect wave. Other birds, like vultures and hawks, use thermal gliding. Thermals are columns of rising warm air that form when sunlight heats the ground unevenly. Birds circle within these invisible updrafts, gaining altitude without flapping. Once high enough, they can glide for miles, scanning the ground below for food or just enjoying the ride. The efficiency of this method is remarkable. A vulture can spend hours in the air using hardly any energy at all. Parrots, swifts, and many songbirds aren't true specialists in gliding, but they still use it as a means to extend their flight time between flaps. A well-timed glide can conserve energy during long-distance travel, or provide a stealthy approach when swooping into a tree or down to the ground. It's not always about going far, it's about going efficiently. Gliding isn't limited to birds, of course. Flying squirrels, sugar gliders, and colugos are excellent examples among mammals. They launch from trees, stretch their limbs to expose a membrane of skin, and drift gracefully through the canopy. Though they eventually lose altitude, clever limb adjustments and tail movements allow them to steer, slow their descent, and land with remarkable accuracy. These mammals don't just fall, they steer, pivot, and fine-tune their path like little living parachutes. Even reptiles have tried their hand at gliding. Draco lizards, found in Southeast Asia, have extendable ribs that spread out like wings, allowing them to glide from tree to tree in dense forests. They're not exactly aerodynamic marvels, but they get the job done, often gliding over 30 feet in a single leap. For an animal the size of a pencil case, that's a commendable effort. Frogs too have joined the gliding club. Several species in the tropics have evolved webbing between their toes that acts like a makeshift wing when they jump from high perches. The same goes for some snakes, such as the paradise tree snake, which flattens its body and undulates mid-air, using a combination of gliding and wriggling to stay airborne. If that sounds a little unnerving, well, gliding snakes are definitely not nature's most relaxing invention, but they're undeniably effective. On the mechanical side, humans have long been fascinated by the idea of gliding. The earliest gliders were simple, often dangerous contraptions, fabric stretched over wooden frames, launched by brave or perhaps overly optimistic inventors. But through experimentation and a few bruised tailbones, modern gliders have become sleek, high-performance machines capable of traveling hundreds of miles in a single flight. Sailplanes, also known as gliders, have long, slender wings designed to maximize lift and minimize drag. Pilots launch into the air using a tow plane or a winch, then release and search for rising air currents to stay aloft. Thermals, ridge lift, and mountain waves are all fair game. With no engine to drown out the experience, flying a sailplane is often described as the closest humans can get to soaring like a bird. It's silent, smooth, and requires constant awareness of the invisible structures in the sky, heat, wind, and terrain. Glider pilots read the landscape the way a surfer reads waves. They look for sunlit fields that might generate thermals, for hills that deflect wind upward, or for clouds that mark the tops of rising air columns. It's a mix of science and intuition, of calculation and feeling, and when done well, it allows for flight that is not just efficient, but deeply satisfying. Hang gliders and paragliders offer another form of gliding, often from mountaintops or cliffs. These lightweight devices use fabric wings and open-air frames, with the pilots suspended below. Steering is accomplished through subtle shifts in body weight and changes in wing tension. It's not as fast or efficient as a sailplane, but it offers a remarkable sense of freedom. You launch, catch the wind, and suddenly you're floating, not falling, carried along by the invisible rivers of air that swirl above the earth. While gliding lacks the drama of roaring engines or the acrobatics of flapping wings, it's a marvel of quiet efficiency. It turns gravity from a foe into a friend, using descent to travel, not just drop. It's also one of the most accessible forms of flight in nature. No need for complex muscles or high metabolic rates, just the right shape, a bit of height, and some cooperative air. What's most fascinating is how gliding has evolved again and again across the tree of life. It's a strategy that works well in forests, where the canopy offers high launching points and ground-level dangers encourage aerial escape. It's efficient, versatile, and often surprisingly precise. Creatures with no engines, no feathers, and sometimes not even legs have found ways to use the air like a bridge between the trees. Whether it's a sailplane tracing lazy spirals through the sky, or a flying squirrel leaping into the moonlit night, gliding reminds us that flight doesn't always need power. Sometimes, all it takes is a clever design, a bit of altitude, and the patience to let the air do most of the work. For most of human history, the sky was a place reserved for birds, gods, and the occasional errant kite. The idea that humans might one day take to the skies was as far-fetched as living on the moon or putting cheese in the crust of pizza. And yet, the desire to fly has been with us for millennia, etched into mythology, scribbled into notebooks, and occasionally tested with questionable contraptions launched from unfortunate rooftops. It's easy to laugh now, with airports and jetliners and astronauts in orbit, but the early attempts at flight were anything but smooth. They were often tragic, sometimes absurd, and always ambitious. But behind every comically bad design and every crash landing was something truly inspiring, a belief that flight wasn't just possible, but inevitable. One of the first names that springs to mind when we talk about early human flight is Leonardo da Vinci. In the late 15th century, long before anyone had a clue about air pressure or lift, da Vinci sketched out elaborate flying machines in his notebooks. There were ornithopters, wing-flapping devices inspired by birds, complete with gears, pulleys, and hand-cranked mechanisms. His most famous design resembles a giant corkscrew, a vertical screw-shaped rotor meant to push air downward and lift the device up. It looked futuristic and brilliant, but it would have done approximately nothing if built with the materials of his time. Still, Da Vinci wasn't trying to build a working aircraft. He was thinking aloud in ink, laying the intellectual groundwork for centuries to come. Fast forward a few hundred years, and the skies were still human-free, but that didn't stop people from trying. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, inventors across Europe tested various winged contraptions, gliders, and parachute-like devices. One of the earliest recorded attempts came from Abbas ibn Firnas in 9th century Spain, who reportedly covered himself in feathers and jumped from a tower. He managed to glide for a short distance before crash landing, injuring his back. Whether it was brave or slightly unhinged is up for debate, but he certainly gets points for enthusiasm. By the 18th century, things started to get a little more scientific and a little more floaty. In 1783, the Montgolfier brothers launched the first hot air balloon in France. It wasn't powered flight, but it was a major milestone. Humans were finally in the air, drifting above the earth in a basket beneath a billowing silk balloon. The very first passengers were a sheep, a duck, and a rooster, presumably chosen for their airworthiness. The balloon ascended to over 1,500 feet and returned safely, which by 18th century standards was essentially magic. Later that year, humans themselves took flight. Jean-François Pilâtre de Rosier and François Laurent d'Arlande became the first people to fly in a hot air balloon, floating over Paris for about 25 minutes. No engines, no flapping wings, just fire, air, and a big dose of bravery. From there, balloons became the cutting edge of aerial adventure. They were used for exploration, military observation, and in some cases champagne-fueled joyrides. But they had a major drawback: no steering. Once airborne, you went where the wind wanted, and getting home was a matter of luck and landing technique. The 19th century brought new ideas, and with them new crash landings. Gliders began to take center stage, thanks in large part to German aviation pioneer Otto Lilienthal. He was the first to systematically study how wings worked, testing over 2,000 flights with carefully constructed gliders. Lilienthal's approach was scientific. He gathered data, experimented with shapes, and helped confirm the importance of cambered wings, the curved airfoil shape that generates lift. Sadly, he died in 1896 after a glider crash, but his work directly inspired the people who would eventually succeed where everyone else had only dreamed. The turn of the 20th century was when things really began to take off, literally. Around the world, inventors were building early flying machines, some with flapping wings, others with rotating propellers or the odd combinations of both. Some were powered by pedals, others by steam engines, and most were alarmingly short on stability. Engines were heavy, materials were flimsy, and the science of aerodynamics was still in its infancy. Yet hope and test pilots sprang eternal. In Brazil, Alberto Santos Dumont built and flew a series of small airships, eventually achieving a brief powered flight in 1906 in France. His aircraft, the 14BS, managed to lift off and fly about 200 feet. While not the first ever, it was among the earliest public demonstrations of powered flight in Europe, and it earned Santos Dumont a hero's welcome. But the true breakthrough happened in the United States, on a windswept beach in North Carolina. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright made the first controlled, sustained flight of a powered, heavier-than-air machine. The Wright Flyer, as it was called, flew for just 12 seconds and covered only 120 feet, but it changed history forever. What set the Wright brothers apart wasn't just their machine, it was their method. They tested ideas systematically, built their own wind tunnel, and understood that control was just as important as lift and power. The three-axis control system, pitch, roll, and yaw, became the blueprint for all future aircraft. Of course, not every early aviator enjoyed the same success. The early 20th century was full of wild designs and wilder outcomes. There were aircraft shaped like pancakes, machines with too many wings or none at all, and one memorable design that looked like a flying canoe with bat wings. Many of these inventions got airborne for a few seconds, then rapidly reacquainted themselves with the ground. And yet, despite the broken bones and busted blueprints, the dream of flight kept going. It wasn't just about transportation or technology. It was about ambition. It was about reaching for something that had always been out of reach. Each failed flight was a stepping stone, a lesson in what not to do next time. Trial and error, as it turns out, is one of the most powerful forces in human innovation. From feathered suits to fiery balloons, from gliders to steam-powered lawn chairs, humanity's path to flight has been anything but straightforward. But it's precisely that bumpy, beautiful road that makes modern aviation so remarkable. Every smooth takeoff today carries the echoes of centuries of crashes, dreams, and people who looked up and thought, why not? In the early 1900s, if you had asked the average person who was going to solve the mystery of flight, the answers would have probably included big names from big cities, wealthy inventors, engineers, or maybe a government-backed scientific team. What no one would have expected was that two unassuming bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, working out of a modest workshop, would quietly crack one of the most stubborn problems in human history. But that's exactly what Orville and Wilbur Wright did. The Wright brothers were not born into money or privilege. They didn't have formal engineering degrees or advanced laboratories. What they did have was curiosity, persistence, and a shared obsession with figuring things out. They were tinkerers by nature, raised in a family that valued learning, experimentation, and spirited debate. Their mechanical experience came from building printing presses and repairing bicycles, machines that require a keen eye for balance, friction, and control. In hindsight, it was perfect training for building an airplane. What set the Wright brothers apart from many of their contemporaries was their methodical, data-driven approach. While others were still experimenting with flapping wings or steam-powered oddities, the Wrights focused on understanding the core principles of flight. They didn't just want to build a flying machine, they wanted to understand how it could be controlled. For them, the real challenge wasn't just getting off the ground, it was staying up there safely and steering in any direction they pleased. To do this, they began with gliders. Between 1900 and 1902, they tested a series of unpowered aircraft at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, a place they chose for its strong winds, soft sand, and wide open spaces. Their early gliders weren't perfect, but they taught the brothers invaluable lessons. They learned how wings behaved in real air, how control surfaces could be manipulated, and most importantly, that much of the existing aerodynamic data was simply wrong. So they built their own wind tunnel. It was small, made of wood and metal, and entirely handmade. Using this wind tunnel, they tested dozens of miniature wing shapes, recording lift and drag with precision. From this research, they developed accurate data on airfoils, curved wing shapes that generate lift efficiently. This was a breakthrough. For the first time, someone had hard numbers to base their designs on, not just guesses or inherited theories. Control was their next big innovation. The Wrights developed a system that allowed a pilot to steer the aircraft in all three axes of movement: pitch, roll, and yaw. Pitch controlled the up and down angle of the nose, roll tilted the wings, and yaw turned the plane left or right. To manage roll, they invented wing warping, a method of twisting the wings in opposite directions to maintain balance and turn smoothly. It was a clever solution, and though modern planes now use ailerons instead of warping, the concept of controlling all three axes remains fundamental. Once they had working gliders and a control system, the final piece of the puzzle was propulsion. They needed an engine that was light, powerful, and compact, something that didn't exist commercially at the time, so naturally they built their own. With the help of their mechanic, Charlie Taylor, they constructed a 4-cylinder internal combustion engine from aluminum, which at the time was an exotic and expensive material. It produced 12 horsepower and weighed just under 180 pounds, just enough to do the job. Their first powered aircraft, the Wright Flyer, was a biplane with a wingspan of 40 feet, a canard elevator in front, and a twin propeller system driven by chains. On December 17th, 1903, with Orville at the controls, the Flyer lifted off the ground at Kill Devil Hills near Kitty Hawk. The flight lasted 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. By day's end, they had made 4 flights, the longest lasting 59 seconds and stretching over 850 feet. It was quiet. There were only 5 witnesses. There were no news cameras or cheering crowds. But it was, without question, the moment that heavier than air, controlled, powered flight became real. What's remarkable is how quickly things progressed from there. Over the next few years, the Wright brothers refined their designs, improved stability, and taught themselves how to truly pilot their machines. They returned to Dayton and began making longer, more impressive flights. In 1908, they demonstrated their aircraft to the US Army and the public, flying in circles, carrying passengers, and staying in the air for over an hour. Their aircraft wasn't just a fragile prototype anymore. It was a working machine with commercial and military potential. At first, many people didn't believe the Wrights had actually flown. Their early successes had been so quiet, so unpublicized, that when they emerged with a refined, reliable flying machine, the public was skeptical. But demonstrations in France and the United States quickly silenced the doubters. Within a few short years, they went from anonymous inventors to international celebrities. Kings, generals, and engineers flocked to see their aircraft, and aviation fever began to spread around the world. Despite their success, the Wright brothers remained cautious and deliberate. They filed patents, protected their designs, and spent considerable time in legal battles with rival inventors and aviation companies. Their focus on control and intellectual property sometimes slowed their public image, especially as newer aircraft designs emerged and surpassed their original flyers in speed and capability. But their legacy was never in question. They had done what so many had only dreamed of. Through persistence, ingenuity, and a refusal to give up, 2 brothers from a bicycle shop turned the dream of flight into a reality. They didn't just build an airplane, they built the foundation of modern aviation. And perhaps the most charming part of the story is how human it all was. They argued, made mistakes, crashed repeatedly, and picked themselves up again. They weren't driven by fame or fortune, but by curiosity, by the desire to solve a puzzle. Their story is not just about flight, it's about how ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're willing to test ideas, challenge assumptions, and keep going, even when the wind is against them. Flying isn't just a matter of brute force or clever design. It's an ongoing negotiation between 4 invisible players: lift, thrust, drag, and gravity. These forces are always in motion, always pushing or pulling, and successful flight is really just the art of keeping them all in check. Think of it as a skyborne balancing act, with every second spent in the air depending on the careful harmony of opposing forces. Take one out of the equation or throw the others off balance, and things go south in a hurry, sometimes quite literally. Let's start with gravity, because it's the one we all know well. Gravity is the downward pull that keeps your feet on the ground, and your snacks firmly stuck to the bottom of the bag. It doesn't care what shape you are or how fast you're going, it just pulls. In flight, gravity acts on the entire mass of the object, always pointing straight down toward the center of the Earth. To stay airborne, something must produce a force equal to or greater than this ever-present tug. That's where lift comes in. Lift is the upward force that counters gravity. It's created when air moves over a wing, or more precisely, when the shape and angle of a wing push air downward, and in turn, receive an upward push. This is often explained using the Bernoulli principle, which says that faster moving air creates lower pressure. Because the top of a wing is curved and the bottom is flatter, air moves more quickly over the top, reducing pressure and creating lift. But that's only part of the story. Newton's third law also plays a role. As the wing pushes air downward, the air pushes the wing upward. The result is the same either way, a gentle but persistent shove skyward. Now that we're aloft, let's talk about thrust. Thrust is the forward force that propels a flying object through the air. Birds generate thrust by flapping their wings. Planes rely on engines or propellers. Even insects, for all their erratic buzzing, are producing forward momentum with each chaotic wing beat. Thrust is what gets the air moving over the wings in the first place. Without it, you'd be a very expensive kite. But of course, the sky doesn't make things easy. Moving through the air means facing resistance, and that resistance is called drag. Drag is the backward force that pushes against an object's motion. It's created by the friction of air molecules rubbing against the surface and by the pressure differences around the object. The faster you go, the more drag you create. It's the aerodynamic equivalent of walking into a strong headwind with a large umbrella. It slows you down and makes you work harder. So there we have it. Lift pushing up, gravity pulling down, thrust pushing forward, and drag pulling back. At any given moment during flight, these four forces are at play. But flight isn't just about having them present, it's about having them in balance. When lift equals gravity and thrust equals drag, you get straight and level flight. Change the balance and the aircraft climbs, descends, accelerates, or slows down. Imagine a bird soaring overhead. Its wings generate lift, its body weight provides gravity, its flapping creates thrust, and the air pushing against its feathers causes drag. With slight adjustments, maybe a shift in wing angle or a brief beat of its tail, it can alter the balance of these forces and change direction or altitude. It's not brute force, but finesse, that keeps the bird aloft and in control. Aircraft follow the same rules. A pilot adjusts pitch to change lift, adds throttle to increase thrust, and uses flaps or air brakes to manipulate drag. Every movement is about shifting the relationship between the forces to suit the situation. Want to climb? Increase lift by angling the nose upward and increasing speed. Want to descend? Reduce thrust, lower the nose, and let gravity lend a hand. But balance isn't just about going where you want to go. It's also about stability. An aircraft or animal in flight needs to maintain a certain posture in the air. If it tips too far forward, back, or sideways, it can become unstable. That's where control surfaces, or for birds, subtle shifts in wing and tail position come into play. Airplanes have elevators, rudders, and ailerons. The elevator controls pitch, making the nose go up or down. The rudder handles yaw, turning the nose left or right. The ailerons manage roll, tilting the wings up or down to the left or right. By combining movements of these surfaces, a pilot can steer through the sky with surprising grace. A simple banked turn, for example, requires a delicate coordination of ailerons and rudder, adjusting the balance of lift on each wing and maintaining airflow to prevent a stall. Birds, of course, don't have flaps or levers. Instead, they tilt their wings, spread their feathers, and use their tails like tiny rudders to shift their balance. A soaring hawk might extend its wings flat to maximize lift and glide silently. A diving falcon tucks its wings in to reduce drag and increase speed. It's all about controlling those four forces, constantly adjusting to wind, speed, and the ever-shifting dynamics of the air. Gliders do something similar, but without the benefit of an engine. They rely on rising air, thermals, ridge lift, or mountain waves, to gain altitude and maintain lift. Since they have no thrust, they must always trade altitude for speed, carefully balancing lift and drag as they search for invisible updrafts. Glider pilots often describe the sensation as more of a conversation with the sky than a battle. Reading the air, feeling the currents, and reacting to the gentle suggestions of the atmosphere. Even at the microscopic scale, insects manage this balance, albeit in their own unique ways. They generate lift in bursts, rely on wing rotation to tweak airflow, and produce thrust with each asymmetric flap. Drag is often welcomed as a stabilizing force rather than an enemy. In the realm of tiny flyers, the balance becomes more dynamic, more chaotic, but no less essential. In high-speed flight, like that of a jet aircraft or a diving peregrine falcon, the forces become even more pronounced. Lift must be greater to compensate for weight at higher speeds. Drag increases exponentially, requiring stronger engines or sleeker shapes. Thrust becomes the dominant force, with engines pushing back against the massive air resistance encountered at high velocities. And stability becomes a tightrope walk, with control surfaces fine-tuning every motion to keep the aircraft, or bird, on the right path. Understanding these four forces isn't just for pilots or engineers. It helps explain the elegance of a paper airplane gliding across a room, the effortless swoop of a seagull riding a breeze, and the moment a commercial jet leaves the ground, seemingly defying logic. Flight's not magic, but it is magnificent. A balance of forces, a whisper between air and object, constantly shifting but always in dialogue. The beauty of flight lies not just in going up or forward, but in staying steady, in holding your position against invisible pressures, and in bending those pressures to your will. It's the physics of freedom. And whether it's a bird riding the wind or a machine powered by combustion, the song remains the same. Lift me, push me, hold me steady, and I will fly. At first glance, an airplane might look like a smooth metal tube with wings slapped on the sides and an engine or two bolted underneath. But every curve, angle, and panel on a plane is there for a reason. Planes aren't just vehicles. They're carefully crafted machines built to slice through the sky with stability, speed, and grace. Underneath all the aluminum and rivets is a design that balances strength, lightness, and control with just the right amount of lift to keep several tons of metal airborne. Let's begin with the body, or fuselage. This is the central structure that holds everything together. It's the long tube where passengers sit, where cargo is stored, and where the cockpit is located. If a plane were a fish, the fuselage would be the body, keeping the head and tail in line and giving shape to the whole form. It needs to be strong enough to handle the pressure changes at altitude, yet light enough not to weigh down the wings. The fuselage is also where you'll find the nose of the aircraft, home to avionics, radar systems, and the cockpit where the pilots work their magic. Modern cockpits are filled with instruments that monitor everything from altitude and speed to wind direction and engine performance. But even the most advanced technology still depends on the structure of the plane to respond correctly to the air. Connected to the fuselage, of course, are the wings, the true stars of the show. These are what make flight possible. Air moves over and under the wings, generating lift through their curved shape, known as an airfoil. The airfoil creates a pressure difference. Lower pressure on top, higher pressure underneath. This difference provides the upward push that counteracts gravity and keeps the plane in the air. But wings aren't just simple slabs of metal. They're filled with complex systems, fuel tanks, structural spars, and control surfaces that help direct the flow of air and adjust the plane's position. The outer edges of the wings feature several moving parts, each with a specific job to do. First, there are the ailerons. These are small hinged sections near the wingtips, one on each side. Ailerons move in opposite directions. When one goes up, the other goes down. This creates a rolling motion, tilting the wings to the left or right and allowing the plane to bank into a turn. Think of ailerons like the handlebars of a bicycle, giving the pilot the ability to lean into a curve rather than just steering flat. Closer to the body of the plane are the flaps. Flaps are large panels that extend downward and backward from the trailing edge of the wing. They're used during takeoff and landing to increase lift at lower speeds. By changing the shape and surface area of the wing, flaps allow the aircraft to generate more lift without needing more speed. They also increase drag, which is useful when slowing down. It's like opening an umbrella while riding a bike. More surface area means more resistance and more control at slower speeds. On some aircraft, there are also slats on the leading edge of the wing. These devices extend forward to change the airflow and help the wing maintain lift at high angles. Together, slats and flaps turn a high-speed flying machine into something gentle enough to land smoothly on a runway. Now let's move to the back of the plane, the tail section, or empennage. This part includes the horizontal and vertical stabilizers, which do exactly what their name suggests. They stabilize. The horizontal stabilizer running across the tail keeps the nose from pitching up or down too much. Attached to this stabilizer is the elevator, a movable surface that controls pitch. Whether the nose points higher or lower, pull the elevator up, the nose goes up, push it down, and the nose follows. It's like a seesaw for the sky. The vertical stabilizer, meanwhile, sticks up like a fin at the rear of the aircraft. It keeps the plane from yawing or swinging left and right like a weather vane. The rudder is attached to the vertical stabilizer and works like the rudder on a boat. When the pilot pushes the rudder pedals, The rudder moves to direct airflow and swing the nose left or right. Combined with ailerons and elevators, the rudder helps keep the plane coordinated during turns and corrections. All these control surfaces, ailerons, elevators, rudder, flaps, and slats, are manipulated by the pilot using a control column or yoke, pedals, and sometimes automated systems. In modern airliners, these movements are often transmitted electronically rather than through cables or pulleys. This system is known as fly-by-wire, and it allows for more precise and responsive control. But the basic physics at play remain the same, whether you're flying a jumbo jet or a glider made from balsa wood. Engines, while not technically part of the aerodynamic structure, are vital for creating thrust. Jet engines work by sucking in air, compressing it, mixing it with fuel, and igniting it to produce a high-speed exhaust that pushes the plane forward. Propeller engines do something similar, spinning blades to pull the aircraft through the air. Either way, engines provide the forward motion needed to generate lift over the wings. But a plane isn't just a collection of wings and engines. It's a system, a flying ecosystem, where every part plays a role in keeping it stable, responsive, and safe. The shape of the nose reduces drag. The smooth skin of the fuselage helps air glide along the body. The landing gear tucks away to reduce resistance. Even the paint can influence aerodynamics and temperature regulation at altitude. What's perhaps most impressive is how it all comes together in flight. As the engines roar and the runway blurs beneath the wheels, the plane gathers speed. Air rushes over the wings. The flaps might be extended slightly. The ailerons, rudder, and elevator stand ready. And then, almost magically, but really thanks to physics, the plane lifts off the ground. The nose rises, the tail dips ever so slightly, and the aircraft becomes a bird of aluminum and circuitry slicing through the sky with poise and purpose. Airplanes might seem complex, and they are, but they follow simple principles. They move forward, they push air down, they respond to the invisible forces that shape every journey through the sky. The parts may be many, but the purpose is singular: to fly safely, smoothly, and with the kind of grace that turns engineering into art. Jet engines are a bit like extremely determined air pumps with a fiery twist. Their entire job is to inhale great gulps of air, set that air on fire in a very controlled way, and then throw it out the back so hard and fast that the engine, and everything attached to it, gets pushed forward. It's the ultimate example of Newton's third law in action. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You throw air backwards, and you get to go forward. Simple in concept, thunderous in execution. Unlike propeller engines, which pull a plane through the air using rotating blades, jet engines create thrust by accelerating air straight through a narrow tube. It all starts with the intake. Air rushes in as the aircraft moves forward, entering the front of the engine where it meets the fan. This is not your average household fan. These blades are massive, often taller than a person, and designed to compress the incoming air. Some of this air bypasses the engine core and flows around it, helping with cooling and adding extra thrust. This is especially true in high-bypass turbofan engines, which are commonly used in commercial airliners. The rest of the air continues into the compressor section, a series of spinning blades and stationary vanes that squeeze the air into a tight, high-pressure stream. Compressing the air raises its temperature and makes it more responsive to ignition. This highly pressurized air is then funneled into the combustion chamber, where it meets fuel, usually kerosene-based jet fuel. A spark ignites the mixture, creating a controlled explosion that dramatically increases pressure and temperature. Now comes the dramatic part. The hot, expanding gases shoot out the back of the engine at extremely high speeds. Before they leave entirely, they pass through a turbine, a kind of windmill inside the engine that spins thanks to the escaping gases. This turbine is connected by a shaft to the front compressor, keeping the whole process going. It's a beautifully self-sustaining cycle. The air coming in powers the machinery that pulls more air in. At the very end, the fast-moving gases exit the nozzle, and the plane rockets forward in response. All of this happens in a matter of milliseconds, thousands of times per minute, and it's incredibly efficient at high speeds and altitudes. Jet engines are powerful, but they come into their own when a plane is cruising 30,000 feet above the Earth, where the air is thinner, colder, and much less crowded. Now, if you push a jet fast enough, you eventually reach the speed of sound. That magic number is known as Mach 1. At sea level, the speed of sound is about 760 miles per hour, though it changes slightly with altitude and temperature. Hitting that speed is no small feat, and going beyond it, achieving supersonic flight, introduces a whole new set of challenges and physics puzzles. First, there's the issue of compressibility. As a plane nears the speed of sound, the air in front of it starts behaving differently. It can no longer move out of the way quickly enough and begins to compress, forming pressure waves that build up dramatically. These waves eventually merge into a single shock wave, and when the plane breaks through that barrier, it creates a sonic boom, a sudden, thunderous crack that can rattle windows and startle birds for miles. Supersonic flight requires engines and airframes designed to handle this intense environment. Jet engines that operate well at subsonic speeds often struggle near or beyond Mach 1. That's where afterburners come in. These are secondary combustion chambers located behind the turbine. By injecting additional fuel into the hot exhaust stream and igniting it, afterburners provide a burst of extra thrust. It's a bit like turning your engine into a controlled fire hose. The result is raw speed, but also a dramatic increase in fuel consumption. Afterburners are powerful, but they're thirsty. Military jets are the most common users of afterburners in supersonic flight. Fighters like the F-22 Raptor or the Eurofighter Typhoon can exceed Mach 2, giving them a tactical edge in speed and agility. But all that performance comes with trade-offs, extra heat, extra noise, and much higher fuel burn. Supersonic flight is loud, expensive, and complicated, which is part of why it's still relatively rare in civilian aviation. Still, supersonic passenger travel isn't just a fantasy, it already happened. The Concorde, a joint British and French marvel, began service in the 1970s and could cruise at over Mach 2. It cut transatlantic flight times nearly in half, flying from London to New York in under 3.5 hours. The experience was luxurious, the technology groundbreaking, and the engineering dazzling. But there were limitations. Sonic booms restricted where it could fly, fuel efficiency wasn't ideal, and ticket prices made it an exclusive club. Eventually, rising costs and decreasing demand led to Concorde's retirement in 2003. Even earlier than Concorde, the Soviet-built Tupolev Tu-144 also achieved supersonic passenger flight, although with a far rockier history and limited success. It was faster but less reliable, and its service life was brief. Still, both aircraft showed that supersonic travel was technically possible. The challenge wasn't building a fast plane, it was making a fast plane practical. Today, interest in supersonic flight is experiencing a quiet resurgence. New companies are exploring the possibility of quieter booms, better fuel efficiency, and routes that can accommodate high-speed travel. Technologies like variable cycle engines, advanced aerodynamics, and sustainable aviation fuel could help bring supersonic flight back. This time, with a bit more responsibility built in. Of course, speed isn't everything. Jet engines are marvels not just because they go fast, but because they do so reliably. A modern jetliner engine can run for thousands of hours, withstand extreme temperatures and pressures, and cruise halfway around the world without breaking a sweat. They're built with precision materials like titanium and ceramic composites, designed to expand and contract with heat without falling apart. It's industrial art on a grand scale. And despite all the noise and fire and power, jet engines are some of the most thoroughly tested machines on the planet. They go through rigorous evaluations before they are ever attached to a plane, enduring bird strikes, hailstorms, extreme heat, and freezing cold. Engineers try their best to break them on the ground so they don't break in the sky. At cruising altitude, though, the experience is quiet. The roar is mostly behind you, the cabin is pressurized and calm, and the engines hum along like distant thunder. All that combustion, compression, and acceleration becomes background music for your in-flight movie or your well-earned nap. And that's part of the magic. The wild forces that push jets forward are kept under control by design, discipline, and a whole lot of clever engineering. So the next time you look out the window and see that engine hanging under the wing, remember what it's doing. It's breathing in air, squeezing it, setting it on fire, and throwing it backward, again and again, thousands of times per minute. It's making the sky a highway. And whether you're cruising at 500 miles per hour or watching a fighter jet streak past with a boom, it all comes down to that beautiful, noisy, controlled explosion called jet propulsion. Helicopters are the mechanical equivalent of a hummingbird crossed with a Swiss Army knife. They don't just fly, they hover, pivot, ascend straight up, descend like a feather, and even fly sideways or backward if the mood strikes. Where airplanes need long runways and forward motion to get airborne, helicopters can lift off from a hospital rooftop or land on a mountain ledge no wider than a picnic table. It's the kind of flight that looks like it belongs in science fiction, but it's all real, and all based on some wonderfully clever engineering. At the heart of every helicopter is the rotor. This is not just a big spinning fan stuck on top. It's a set of airfoils or blades rotating fast enough to generate lift. These rotor blades act just like airplane wings, only instead of slicing through the air as the aircraft moves forward, they create airflow by spinning in place. Each blade is shaped like an airfoil, curved on top and flatter on the bottom, so as it spins, it generates lift by the same principles that help airplanes fly. But helicopters don't just lift off, they hover, and that changes everything. When an airplane flies, the whole body moves forward, helping stabilize the airflow over the wings. In a helicopter, hovering means staying in one place while constantly adjusting to air movement, temperature changes, and even the tiniest shifts in balance. This requires constant corrections, and helicopters manage that with an incredible system of moving parts known as the rotor hub and swash plate assembly. The swash plate is one of those engineering gems that sounds like it belongs in a steampunk novel. It allows the angle of each rotor blade to change as it spins, controlling how much lift each blade generates at different points in its rotation. This is known as cyclic pitch control. By changing the pitch of each blade depending on its position in the circle, the helicopter can tilt in any direction. Want to move forward? Increase the angle of attack when the blade is at the back of the circle. Want to slide left? Adjust the pitch when the blade's on the right. It's like paddling a canoe with just one oar, only the oar is spinning above your head hundreds of times per minute. There's also something called collective pitch control, which adjusts the pitch of all the blades at once. Pulling up on the collective lever inside the cockpit increases the angle of every rotor blade, which increases lift and makes the helicopter rise. Lowering the collective decreases lift and brings the aircraft gently down. Combine that with the throttle, which controls engine power, and the result is vertical movement that's smooth, precise, and surprisingly intuitive once you've had a few hundred hours of training. But lifting off and moving around is only half the battle. Helicopters also have to deal with a tricky side effect of their own design: torque. When the main rotor spins in one direction, the body of the helicopter naturally wants to spin in the opposite direction, thanks to Newton's third law. If you don't counteract that spin, the entire aircraft would just sit on the spot and spin like a carnival ride. To solve this, most helicopters have a tail rotor. This smaller, sideways-facing rotor at the end of a long boom provides lateral thrust to counter the torque from the main rotor. The pilot controls it with foot pedals. Press the left pedal, and the tail rotor reduces thrust, allowing the aircraft to turn left. Press the right, and it increases thrust, turning the nose to the right. It's a simple idea with a big impact. It stabilizes the entire aircraft and allows for smooth, controlled yaw movement. Not all helicopters use tail rotors. Some, like the Chinook, have two large rotors mounted on top that spin in opposite directions. This configuration, called tandem rotors, cancels out torque automatically, eliminating the need for a tail rotor. There are also coaxial helicopters, like those built by Russian aerospace companies, with two sets of rotors stacked on top of each other, spinning in opposite directions on the same axis. This design is compact and efficient, particularly for heavy lifting in tight spaces. Whatever the configuration, the end goal is the same: stable, controlled flight in all directions, including the magical ability to hover. Hovering looks effortless, but it's actually one of the hardest things a helicopter can do. It demands constant micro-adjustments to stay level, especially in wind or turbulence. Every puff of air, every shift in passenger weight, every temperature change affects lift and balance. Pilots describe it as trying to balance on a beach ball while juggling. It's all about feedback and responsiveness, reading the aircraft and the environment and reacting instantly. That agility is what makes helicopters so useful. They can reach places no other vehicle can. Rooftops, mountaintops, remote wilderness, urban canyons. They're used for medical evacuations, search and rescue, firefighting, construction, military operations, and tourism. Anywhere speed, access, and precision matter, the helicopter shines. It's like an airborne multi-tool, ready to adapt to just about any situation. Even the cockpit layout reflects this complexity. Unlike airplanes, which often rely on a yoke or side stick and throttle, helicopter pilots juggle three main controls simultaneously: the collector for lift, the cyclic for direction, and the pedals for yaw. All three must work in harmony, and all three respond to constantly changing forces. It's part choreography, part science, and part muscle memory. Technologically speaking, helicopters are always improving. Newer models feature fly-by-wire systems, where pilot inputs are converted into electronic signals, allowing for even more precise control. Some experimental designs even explore removing pilots altogether, replacing them with automated systems or remote control for delivery, surveillance, or emergency response. Yet even with all these advances, the core physics remain the same: lift, drag, thrust, and torque, all managed by spinning blades and carefully calibrated controls. Despite their complexity, helicopters have a sort of rugged charm. They look mechanical, with exposed parts and rotating blades that feel alive. They hum, they shudder, and they respond to the slightest touch. Where airplanes slice cleanly through the air, helicopters seem to negotiate with it, tilting, adjusting, and finessing their way through invisible currents. It's a kind of flight that trades speed for versatility and distance for precision. A helicopter might not get you across the ocean, but it can pluck you from a mountaintop or land in a clearing no bigger than a backyard trampoline. In many ways, it's not just a machine of flight, but one of access, taking people where no road or runway can go. When you watch a helicopter hovering in place, blades spinning, body steady, it's easy to forget all the forces at play. But beneath that poised, floating posture is a complex ballet of physics, engineering, and human control. It's the closest thing we've built to a mechanical dragonfly, hovering on demand, lifting off like it has somewhere very important to be, and landing with the precision of a whisper. Rockets are not subtle machines. Where birds glide and planes hum, rockets roar, shake, and thunder their way into the sky. They're loud, dramatic, and unapologetically powerful. And they have to be, because leaving Earth isn't easy. It's not enough to simply fly upward. To reach space, a rocket must outrun gravity, punch through the thickest parts of the atmosphere, and keep accelerating until the planet can no longer pull it back. All of that with no runways, no wings, and no chance of turning around for a second try. What makes rockets special is how they generate thrust. While jets and propeller-driven aircraft rely on the air around them for lift and propulsion, rockets bring everything they need with them. They don't need wings to fly or air to push against. Instead, they rely on Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In the case of a rocket, the action is expelling hot gas at incredible speeds out the back. The reaction is that the rocket gets pushed in the opposite direction, up, and eventually out of the atmosphere. To make this happen, rockets burn fuel, but unlike a car engine or a jet which mixes fuel with oxygen from the air, rockets must carry their own oxidizer. That's because once you get high enough, the atmosphere becomes too thin to support combustion. In space, there's no air at all, so if a rocket wants to keep going, it has to bring its own air supply in the form of liquid oxygen, nitric acid, or some other oxidizing agent. This self-contained system is what makes rocket engines work both inside the atmosphere and beyond it. A basic rocket engine works like this. Fuel and oxidizer are pumped into a combustion chamber, where they're ignited. This produces hot gases that expand rapidly, and get forced through a narrow nozzle at the bottom. As the gases shoot downward and outward, the rocket is pushed upward in response. It's not the flames that make the rocket move. It's the violent, high-speed release of gas being shoved in one direction, so the rocket can move in the other. This reaction-based propulsion works incredibly well, but it's also extremely inefficient compared to other forms of transport. Rockets burn through fuel at an astonishing rate. A typical rocket might weigh hundreds of tons at launch, but most of that weight is fuel. By the time it reaches orbit, only a tiny fraction of the original mass remains. It's the ultimate example of using brute force to achieve elegance. A lot of fuel, a lot of fire, and a narrow window of time to make it all work. One of the reasons rockets need so much fuel is gravity. Earth's gravity is relentless. To break free of it, a rocket must reach escape velocity, the speed at which an object no longer falls back to the planet. That number is about 25,000 miles per hour. Thankfully, rockets don't have to reach that speed instantly. They can gradually accelerate by continuously applying thrust. Still, getting to orbit usually means flying sideways at around 17,000 miles per hour while climbing upward through layers of thick air. It's not just a vertical sprint, it's a carefully planned arc that balances altitude and speed. That's where staging comes in. Most rockets aren't a single unit from launch to orbit. They're built in stages, stacked layers that each have their own engines and fuel tanks. The first stage, usually the biggest and most powerful, gets the rocket off the ground and through the lower atmosphere. Once its fuel is spent, it is jettisoned to reduce weight. The second stage takes over, pushing the payload higher and faster. Sometimes there's even a third stage for deep space missions or precise orbital insertion. This step-by-step shedding of used parts helps conserve energy and improve efficiency. Carrying empty fuel tanks into orbit would be like trying to hike up a mountain while dragging your own empty lunchbox the entire way. Better to drop what you don't need and keep going lighter and faster. Modern rockets come in many shapes and sizes, but the physics is the same across the board. Whether it's a small satellite launcher or a massive interplanetary vehicle, the principle is always about mass being pushed in one direction to move the rocket in the opposite direction. That's true whether you're using liquid fuel, solid fuel, or something more exotic like ion propulsion, though ion engines are more often used in the vacuum of space than for takeoff. Solid fuel rockets are relatively simple. The fuel and oxidizer are pre-mixed into a solid compound that burns once ignited. These rockets are reliable and powerful, but can't be turned off once lit. Liquid fuel rockets, on the other hand, offer more control. Fuel and oxidizer are stored separately and mixed only when needed, allowing the engine to be throttled, shut down, or restarted mid-flight. They're more complex but far more versatile, especially for crewed missions or delicate orbital maneuvers. Then there are hybrid engines, which mix elements of both systems, and experimental engines that use plasma or electricity to generate thrust. These new technologies may not replace chemical rockets for launch, but they could revolutionize long-distance space travel in the coming decades. One of the most impressive developments in modern rocketry is the rise of reusable rockets. Traditionally, rockets were used once and then discarded, often burning up in the atmosphere or crashing into the ocean. That made space travel staggeringly expensive. But companies like SpaceX have flipped the script, designing boosters that can return to Earth, land upright, and be launched again. It's a bit like throwing a pencil into the air, having it flip a few times and then land perfectly upright on its eraser. The physics hasn't changed, but the engineering has caught up to the dream. And speaking of dreams, there's something deeply poetic about rockets. They're loud, they're messy, and they shake the ground when they lift off. But they also carry telescopes, weather satellites, robotic explorers, and sometimes people. They turn the sky from a ceiling into a gateway. When you see a rocket rising into the clouds, leaving behind a trail of fire and thunder, it's hard not to feel something stir inside. At their core, rockets are machines built on a simple idea. If you push hard enough in one direction, you'll go the other way. It's Newton's third law with attitude, scale, and a lot of noise. But behind all the drama is a clean, beautiful principle. Every action has a reaction. Throw fire and exhaust out the back, and up you go. Of course, getting to space is just the first step. Staying there, orbiting, docking, and returning. All of that has its own set of rules, but none of it happens without that initial leap, that first blast of energy that defies gravity and breaks through the atmosphere. Rocket science may sound intimidating, but at its heart, it's just physics doing what it does best, turning energy into motion, motion into escape, and escape into possibility. Whether it's launching a satellite, delivering supplies to a space station, or sending robotic explorers to the far edge of the solar system, it all begins with a single principle. Push hard enough, and you just might leave the planet behind. Orbit is one of those concepts that sounds deceptively simple. Fly fast enough sideways and you'll never hit the ground. But when you look at what's really going on, it turns out to be a graceful balancing act between gravity and momentum, a cosmic tug-of-war where the object never wins or loses, just loops endlessly around the planet. It's not flying in the traditional sense. In fact, orbiting is more like falling with a twist. To understand orbit, imagine throwing a baseball. Give it a little toss and it arcs before hitting the ground. Throw it harder and it goes farther. Now imagine you could throw it so fast that as it falls, the Earth curves away beneath it at the same rate. It keeps falling, but never actually reaches the ground. That's what being in orbit means. You're falling around the Earth, not down to it. In low Earth orbit, this happens at roughly 17,000 miles per hour. At that speed, an object like the International Space Station circles the entire planet in about 90 minutes. The key here isn't just altitude, but velocity. If you go straight up and stop, gravity will yank you back down. But if you go sideways fast enough while climbing, you can stay up there, caught in a continuous forward fall. Unlike planes, which generate lift using wings and engines to counter gravity, spacecraft in orbit rely purely on speed. There's no air up there to glide through, and no lift to speak of. Once a spacecraft is in orbit, it doesn't need to keep firing its engines. In the vacuum of space, there's no friction, no air resistance, nothing to slow it down. So, it just keeps going, coasting along its curved path around the planet. There are different types of orbits depending on the mission. Low Earth orbit is where most satellites and crewed missions go, anything from the Hubble Space Telescope to Starlink satellites. Farther out, there's geostationary orbit, about 22,000 miles above the equator, where satellites move at the same speed Earth rotates. From the ground, they appear to hang in one place in the sky, which is great for things like weather observation and television broadcasting. Then there are elliptical orbits, polar orbits, sun-synchronous orbits, each tailored to specific needs, all based on the same fundamental principle: balance gravity with just the right amount of horizontal speed. Getting into orbit is hard enough. Getting back down safely is a whole different challenge. Re-entry may sound like simply falling back to Earth, but it's more like carefully managing an atmospheric dive at speeds that make meteorites look lazy. A returning spacecraft from low Earth orbit hits the atmosphere at around 17,000 miles per hour. At those speeds, air doesn't behave like a soft cushion. It acts more like a wall of fire. As the spacecraft plummets through the atmosphere, it compresses the air in front of it so quickly and so violently that the air heats up to thousands of degrees. This isn't caused by friction, as is often assumed, but by compression. Just like how a bike pump heats up when you rapidly compress air, only on a much more dramatic scale. To survive this fiery descent, spacecraft rely on heat shields. These are made of special materials designed to absorb and dissipate the intense thermal energy. In many cases, the heat shield is ablative, meaning it burns away layer by layer, carrying heat with it and protecting the spacecraft beneath. It's a bit like sacrificing the outer shell to keep the inside cool. The shape of the spacecraft also matters. Capsules like those used in Apollo, Soyuz, or SpaceX's Crew Dragon are designed with a blunt, rounded shape. This helps spread the heat across a wide area and slows the descent by creating more atmospheric drag. It's counterintuitive, but slowing down in space requires good aerodynamics, though in this case, it's more about falling safely than flying gracefully. Controlled re-entry requires precise calculations. Come in too steep, and you risk burning up or experiencing G-forces that could harm the crew. Come in too shallow, and you could skip off the atmosphere like a stone on water and end up somewhere completely unintended, or nowhere at all. Re-entry corridors are narrow, and small deviations can mean big consequences. Guidance systems, thrusters, and timing all play a role in ensuring the spacecraft hits the right angle and lands within the planned recovery zone. For missions returning from beyond low Earth orbit, such as those coming back from the Moon or future missions from Mars, the speeds and heat involved in re-entry are even more extreme. Coming back from the Moon, for instance, means re-entering at over 24,000 miles per hour. Heat shields must be designed to withstand even more intense conditions, and every aspect of the re-entry process becomes more critical. Once through the atmosphere, the spacecraft still needs to slow down to safe landing speeds. Some use parachutes to gently lower the capsule into the ocean or onto solid ground. Others, like the space shuttle, were built to glide down to a runway like a giant unpowered plane. And in recent years, new technologies have been developed for precision landings. SpaceX's Falcon 9 first-stage boosters, for example, use grid fins, cold gas thrusters, and onboard computers to return and land vertically, ready for reuse. Beyond the technical feats, there's a poetic quality to orbit and re-entry. To orbit is to float on the knife's edge between falling and flying, suspended in motion, weightless and distant. To re-enter is to come home through a storm of fire and gravity, shedding speed and silence until parachutes bloom and the Earth rushes up to greet you. What makes orbit so different from typical flight is that once you're there, you're not really flying anymore. Not in the way we think of wings and lift. You're coasting through the vacuum, circling a planet that's always trying to pull you back. And if you want to return, it's not as simple as pointing down. You have to slow down, bleed off momentum, and survive the inferno of atmospheric compression. All of it is a dance with physics. The slingshot of gravity, the razor-thin margins of speed and angle, the delicate threading of a spacecraft through layers of atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour. It's the kind of challenge that makes the idea of space travel so exciting, and the reality so humbling. Orbit and re-entry aren't just technical milestones. They're proof of what's possible when humans apply their curiosity to the cosmos. They show us that with the right speed, the right angle, and a little bit of courage, we can leave the world behind and find our way back again. If you've ever watched a hummingbird hover in midair or seen a maple seed spinning to the ground like a tiny helicopter, you've witnessed nature's original flight engineers at work. Long before humans sketched the first flying machines, the natural world had already figured out an astonishing variety of ways to conquer the air. Birds, insects, bats, gliding mammals, even seeds, all have evolved mechanisms to move through the sky with precision, efficiency, and sometimes a bit of flair. It's no surprise then that engineers and scientists have increasingly turned to nature for inspiration. This process, known as biomimicry, is all about learning from the designs already perfected by evolution and applying them to modern technology. The classic example, of course, is the bird. For centuries, humans looked to birds as the model for flight. The Wright brothers studied pigeons and hawks while developing their flying machines. The basic airfoil shape of wings, with a curved top and flatter bottom, is a direct borrowing from avian anatomy. But as our technology has evolved, the imitation has become more sophisticated. Now we're not just copying wing shapes, we're mimicking muscle movement, feather flexibility, and even how birds sense and respond to turbulence. Some of the most cutting-edge research involves flapping wing robots called ornithopters. These machines don't just fly, they flap their wings like birds or insects. It's a challenging design because flapping requires dynamic motion and constant control. Unlike a fixed-wing aircraft that simply glides through air, an ornithopter must deal with lift, thrust, and stability, all changing with each beat. But the payoff is agility. These robots can maneuver through tight spaces, hover, and dart with precision, perfect for surveillance, search and rescue, or even pollination in greenhouses. Some are modelled after hummingbirds, others after butterflies or dragonflies, and each one draws on a different set of aerodynamic tricks. Insects especially have become popular role models. Their wings are flexible, asymmetrical, and capable of producing lift in ways that often defy traditional models. Tiny drones that mimic bees or flies are now being developed for tasks like environmental monitoring or crop inspection. These micro-air vehicles are built to be lightweight, energy efficient, and able to navigate complex terrain, just like their biological counterparts. Some even incorporate artificial muscles made from smart materials that bend or contract when exposed to electricity, mimicking the twitchy precision of an insect's wing beat. Nature's inspiration goes beyond wings. The tails of birds and lizards are being studied for how they help stabilize flight and recover from mid-air tumbles. The scales of butterflies are being explored for lightweight, heat-resistant materials. Even the eyes of insects are influencing camera design, with compound eye structures allowing for wide-angle views without distortion. And then there are seeds. Yes, seeds. Some of nature's most elegant flyers don't flap or glide, they spin. The seed of the Javan cucumber tree, for example, has wing-like appendages that allow it to soar through the air for long distances before landing. Maple seeds do something similar, twirling to the ground in a spiral motion that slows their descent and spreads them far from the parent tree. Engineers have used these natural designs to create passive gliding devices that can deliver sensors or medical supplies without the need for power or control systems. Fish and aquatic animals also contribute to the story. Their streamlined bodies and efficient motion through water offer insights into how airflow can be controlled. After all, air and water are both fluids, governed by similar rules. The penguin's flippers, for example, provide inspiration for maneuverable underwater drones, but the same principles are being adapted for airborne use as well, especially in turbulent or gusty environments where flexibility and flow control are critical. One fascinating area of biomimicry is in the development of morphing wings, structures that can change shape during flight. Birds do this naturally, folding their wings during dives, spreading them wide to glide, and adjusting individual feathers for subtle corrections. Aircraft with fixed wings can't replicate that kind of adaptability, at least not easily. But researchers are now experimenting with materials and mechanisms that allow wings to bend, twist, and even grow or shrink slightly to adapt to different flight conditions. Some of these systems use memory metals that change shape when heated, or hydraulic systems that shift internal pressure to alter form. Even feathers themselves are under the microscope. Their lightweight structure, overlapping arrangement, and ability to dampen sound are inspiring improvements in aircraft noise reduction and aerodynamic control. Owl feathers, in particular, have serrated edges that reduce turbulence and allow for nearly silent flight, a feature that engineers hope to bring to drones and even passenger planes in the future. The field of biomimicry also extends to navigation. Birds migrate across continents, insects return to tiny nesting sites, and bats weave through caves in the dark, all using a mix of visual cues, magnetic fields, and acoustic signals. By studying these systems, engineers are developing better guidance systems for autonomous aircraft, including drones that can navigate without GPS by using vision-based or sonar-inspired methods. There's a philosophical side to all this too. Biomimicry challenges the idea that nature and technology are separate. Instead, it suggests that nature is technology, just on a timeline billions of years longer than ours. Evolution has already solved countless engineering problems, not by brute force but by refining, adapting, and optimizing over time. A bird doesn't have the power of a jet engine, but it doesn't need to. It's efficient, lightweight, and exquisitely tuned to its environment. Engineers often find that the more they study natural flight, the more humbled they are by its complexity. A sparrow's mid-air twist to avoid a branch, a bee's ability to hover while adjusting to gusts of wind, a bat's echolocation-guided dive through a cluttered cave. These feats involve not just clever structures, but constant feedback, sensory processing, and muscle control. Replicating them in machines means rethinking not just how we build aircraft, but how we program them to respond, adapt, and even learn. There's still a long way to go. Nature had a massive head start, and some of its designs remain beyond our reach. But with each new discovery, each flapping robot or seed-inspired glider, we're getting closer to building machines that don't just fly, but fly well. Not with brute strength, but with elegance. Not in defiance of nature, but in collaboration with it, Biomimicry doesn't just make machines better, it makes them smarter, quieter, and more adaptable. It reminds us that the sky isn't just a space to be conquered, but a place already full of flying things with a lot to teach. And if we're willing to listen to the rustle of wings, the buzz of bees, this silent spiral of a seed, there's a whole world of design ideas waiting to lift us to new heights. Flight is one of evolution's greatest tricks, a breathtaking, improbable, and at times downright extravagant solution to the problem of getting from one place to another. What makes it even more impressive is that it didn't just evolve once. It evolved at least 4 separate times, completely independently, in 4 very different groups: insects, pterosaurs, birds, and bats. That's nature's way of saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again, and then keep trying till something starts soaring. Each of these groups faced its own evolutionary puzzles. Getting off the ground isn't easy. It requires more than just a pair of wings. It demands lightweight bodies, strong muscles, efficient lungs, excellent balance, and a complete redesign of limbs that were originally meant for crawling, swimming, or climbing. But when the rewards are great, escaping predators, reaching new food sources, or simply gliding into new territory, evolution is willing to do the work. The first creatures to take to the skies were insects, over 300 million years ago. That's before birds, before dinosaurs, even before trees looked anything like they do today. Insects invented flight when land animals were still figuring out how to walk, and they did it in style. Early dragonflies had wingspans of over 2 feet and dominated the Carboniferous skies, buzzing over swampy forests like airborne relics from a science fiction novel. What's truly wild is that insect flight seems to have evolved from scratch, not from modified limbs, but possibly from extensions of the exoskeleton used for thermoregulation or gliding. Eventually these structures became mobile, supported by muscle, and somewhere along the line started flapping. And once an insect could flap with control, the sky was no longer the limit. It became home. The fact that insects are still the most diverse and numerous flying animals on the planet speaks volumes about how well they crack the code. Fast forward many millions of years, and we find the next major leap, the pterosaurs. These were not dinosaurs, but close relatives, and they were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight. Some of them were small, no bigger than sparrows, while others, like Quetzalcoatlus, had wingspans that stretched over 30 feet, rivaling modern aircraft. Their wings were made of a membrane stretched from an elongated 4th finger all the way to their ankles, forming a sort of leathery sail. Unlike birds, which would later use feathers and modified forelimbs to fly, pterosaurs relied on a structure more akin to a bat's wing, though they had their own unique anatomical solutions. They had hollow bones to reduce weight, a specialized crest on the sternum for muscle attachment, and in many species elaborate head crests that might have helped with balance, display, or both. Pterosaurs ruled the Mesozoic skies for over 150 million years before going extinct along with their dinosaur cousins. But while they vanished, the idea of flight stuck around. Enter the birds. Descended from small feathered dinosaurs, birds refined the mechanics of flight into something sleek and powerful. The first bird-like creature we know of is Archaeopteryx, which lived around 150 million years ago. It had feathers, teeth, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail. Basically a dinosaur wearing a feather boa and figuring out how to glide. Feathers, interestingly, didn't originally evolve for flight. They likely started as insulation, or for display, bright colours, mating rituals, that sort of thing. But once feathers were in place, evolution found new uses for them. Feathers provided lift, control, and stability in the air. Combine that with lightweight bones, air sacs to reduce body mass, and a muscular system geared for high-energy flapping, and birds were on their way. What makes birds unique is how completely their bodies were reshaped by the demands of flight. Their bones became pneumatic, hollow but strong. Their breastbones developed a deep keel for powerful flight muscles to anchor. Their vision became keen, their brains wired for precise coordination, and their respiratory systems evolved to be among the most efficient in the animal kingdom. All of this allowed birds to spread into nearly every corner of the globe, from the icy cliffs of Antarctica to the high reaches of the Himalayas. And then there were bats, the latecomers to the party. Bats appeared around 50 million years ago, well after birds had already claimed the skies. But bats came with their own ideas. Unlike birds, whose wings are mostly arm, bats use their entire hand to fly. Their wings are formed by a thin membrane of skin stretched over elongated fingers, creating a flexible, responsive surface that allows for incredible aerial agility. Bats are the only mammals to evolve true powered flight, and they do it with flair. Some species can hover like hummingbirds, others perform acrobatic twists and dives, and a few even migrate long distances. Their success lies not just in wing design, but in echolocation, a system of navigation using sound. Bats emit high-pitched calls and listen for the echoes to locate insects, trees, and even other bats. It's a kind of sonar that allows them to fly and hunt in complete darkness. Not all bats use echolocation, and not all eat insects. Some sip nectar, others eat fruit, and a few go for blood. But all of them owe their aerial mastery to a unique combination of biology and behavior. What's truly fascinating is how each of these four flying lineages found its own path. Insects went small and fast, with wings that never needed bones. Pterosaurs built giant sail wings with reinforced finger scaffolding. Birds reworked their entire bodies around feathers and hollow bones. Bats transformed hands into wings and added sonar to navigate the night sky. There's no single blueprint for flight, just a shared goal and many creative ways to reach it. Evolution had to solve a long list of problems to make flight work. How do you lift off without being too heavy? How do you land without breaking bones? How do you steer, glide, and power through the air with muscles and energy systems that evolved on the ground? Each solution came with trade-offs. Flight demands energy, precision, and a high level of control. But the payoff is immense. Access to new food, fewer predators, faster travel, and the ability to explore vast environments. Even more impressive is that these adaptations didn't appear all at once. They happened gradually, in tiny, often imperceptible steps. Slight changes in bone structure, a little more lift, a better sense of balance. Over millions of years, those changes added up. That's the real magic of evolution. It doesn't need to invent things from scratch. It tweaks, repurposes, and builds on what's already there. Today, flight remains one of the most stunning feats in nature. From a dragonfly skimming a pond to an eagle circling a mountain, from a bat darting through moonlight to a hummingbird hovering at a flower, each flyer is the result of millions of years of experimentation, failure, and refinement. And each one reminds us that nature never stops innovating. Flight in its many forms is a testament to the power of possibility. It's not just about wings, it's about transformation. A slow, steady push from crawling to gliding to soaring. And every creature that's taken to the sky carries the story of that journey in its bones, its feathers, its wings, or its beating heart. The skies of tomorrow may not look entirely like a science fiction movie, but they're definitely on their way to getting a tech upgrade. After more than a century of jet engines, aluminum wings, and rumbling runways, flight is entering a new era, one that's cleaner, quieter, and in many ways more vertical. From battery-powered planes to airborne taxis, from autonomous drones to rockets that land on their tails like it's just another Tuesday, the future of flight is unfolding with equal parts bold ambition and thoughtful engineering. Let's start with electric aviation. For years, electric cars have slowly taken over the roads, and now aircraft are beginning to follow. The basic idea is simple. Replace combustion engines with electric motors and swap jet fuel for batteries. It sounds elegant and appealing. No emissions, less noise, fewer moving parts, but the reality is a little more grounded. The main hurdle isn't the motors, it's the batteries. Airplanes need to be lightweight, and today's lithium-ion batteries are still far heavier than jet fuel for the same amount of energy. That said, progress is happening. Several small electric aircraft are already in the sky, typically carrying just 1 or 2 passengers. They're used for training, short hops, or demonstration flights, showing that the technology works, even if it isn't quite ready for long-haul commercial use. Companies are investing heavily in improving battery energy density, and some designs are experimenting with hybrid systems that combine electric motors with small fuel-burning generators for backup. Electric propulsion offers some unique benefits. It's quieter, which could reduce noise pollution around cities and airports. It's also mechanically simpler. An electric motor has fewer parts than a traditional engine, making maintenance easier and potentially lowering costs. For regional flights and short-range travel, electric planes might one day become the norm, especially as infrastructure improves and green energy becomes more widespread. Then there's the dream of vertical flight. Helicopters already gave us a taste of what it's like to skip the runway and rise straight into the sky. But now a new class of vehicles is emerging: electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, known more casually as eVTOLs. These futuristic-looking machines resemble large drones or tiny flying buses with multiple rotors, sleek bodies, and a mission to transform how we move through cities. The idea is to create flying taxis, quiet, efficient, pilot-optional vehicles that can carry a handful of passengers from rooftop to rooftop, bypassing traffic and reducing commute times. Dozens of companies are working on prototypes, and some have already flown. Most eVTOLs use distributed electric propulsion, meaning they have several small rotors instead of a single big one. This improves safety. If one motor fails, the others can compensate, and makes for a smoother ride. These vehicles promise to be quieter than helicopters, more energy efficient and potentially cheaper to operate once the technology matures. Still, challenges remain. Battery weight, flight range, safety certification, air traffic management and passenger trust all have to be solved before sky taxis become part of daily life. It may not be 5 years away, but it's no longer a distant dream either. Trials and limited services could become reality in certain cities within the next decade. Autonomous drones are another piece of the future puzzle. While many people already associate drones with camera-equipped quadcopters buzzing over parks and festivals, their potential goes far beyond photography. Delivery drones, for instance, could bring medicine, groceries, or small packages directly to your doorstep, especially in remote or hard-to-reach areas. Some are already being tested in rural regions and hospital networks where speed matters more than volume. Drones are also being used in agriculture to survey crops, in environmental research to monitor wildlife, and in emergency response to assess damage after natural disasters. As artificial intelligence improves and regulation catches up, drones could become essential tools in industries we haven't even imagined yet. And then there's the return of reusable rockets. In the not-too-distant past, a rocket launch meant watching a multi-billion-dollar structure soar into the sky, only to discard huge pieces into the ocean. It was like throwing away a jumbo jet after every flight. But companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin have changed the game by making rockets that can return to Earth and land themselves upright. These booster stages can be refueled and flown again, dramatically reducing the cost of space access. This innovation has opened the door to more frequent launches, cheaper satellite deployment, and even the serious consideration of space tourism. While suborbital joyrides are still only for the extremely wealthy, the concept is now real. Everyday people, teachers, scientists, and artists have already taken brief journeys to the edge of space, experiencing weightlessness and watching Earth curve beneath them. Looking further ahead, companies are exploring the possibility of high-speed point-to-point travel using suborbital flight. In theory, a rocket plane could take you from New York to Sydney in under an hour. It sounds wild, but prototypes are being discussed. Whether this ever becomes practical for mass transit is uncertain, but the fact that it's even on the table says a lot about how flight is evolving. Supersonic travel is also making a potential comeback. Since Concorde retired in the early 2000s, no commercial aircraft has regularly flown faster than the speed of sound. But new designs are promising quieter booms, better fuel efficiency, and safer operations. If successful, they could bring back the golden age of fast, high-altitude travel, only this time with 21st century sustainability and comfort. Of course, not all of the future is loud and flashy. Some innovations are quietly reshaping how we fly without changing the basic shape of an airplane. Improved air traffic control using satellite-based tracking, more efficient engines, lighter materials, and artificial intelligence and pilot assistance are all helping to make flying safer, smoother, and greener. Blended wing bodies, solar-powered drones, and hydrogen-fueled engines are being developed to make aviation more sustainable without compromising performance. One of the most promising trends is the focus on climate impact. Aviation accounts for a significant portion of global carbon emissions, and future designs are increasingly focused on reducing or eliminating those emissions. Whether through electric propulsion, sustainable aviation fuels, or completely new engine types, the goal is clear: fly farther and faster, but leave less behind. Still, with all these advancements on the horizon, it's important to keep expectations grounded. Flight will continue to evolve, but it won't happen overnight. Every new aircraft must meet strict safety regulations, prove economic viability, and earn public trust. Infrastructure will need to adapt. Airspace will need to be managed more efficiently, and new technology will need to integrate smoothly with old systems. The sky may be open, but it's also busy, and change comes carefully. Even so, the future of flight looks full of possibility. Electric planes humming across short distances, vertical taxis weaving through skyscrapers, silent drones surveying farms, rockets rising and returning like something out of a magician's hat. It's not science fiction. It's a slow, steady unfolding of what comes next. Flight at its core is about freedom and reach. It's about going farther, faster, and with a bit more grace each time. And while tomorrow's aircraft may hum instead of roar, hover instead of roll, or land vertically instead of taxiing down a runway, the spirit remains the same. It's about lifting off, looking ahead, and trusting that with each new design, each bold idea, we'll find new ways to touch the sky. Even after all this time, we still look up. We still pause at the sound of wings overhead, still crane our necks to follow the silver arc of a distant airplane, still marvel at the quiet hush of a bird gliding on a breeze. Flight continues to captivate us, not because we've mastered it, but because it keeps reminding us how big the sky is and how much we've yet to understand. From the first flapping wings of ancient insects to the roar of rocket engines piercing the stratosphere, flight has always been more than a way to get from place to place. It's a symbol, a dream, a quiet yearning written into our imaginations. Children stretch their arms out like wings. Artists paint skies filled with birds, stars, and machines that climb the heavens. Pilots speak of being up there as something sacred, a solitude, a serenity, a sense of perspective you can't get from the ground. The sky, after all, doesn't belong to any one creature or country. It has been shared, across time, by dragonflies and swifts, by feathered dinosaurs and flocks of migrating geese, by gliders, astronauts, and perhaps one day, by travelers heading to orbit for the weekend. It is open, infinite, and deeply humbling, and it invites us to imagine what else might be possible. We fly because we're curious about what's out there, about how things work, about how far we can go. But we also fly because it brings us closer to something we can't quite name. Freedom, perhaps, or perspective, or the strange, still thrill of being between the earth and the stars. Flying isn't just a technological feat, it's a human one. It took centuries of trial and error, of scribbled notebooks and wind tunnels, of leaps of faith and careful calculations. It took people watching birds and sketching ideas, building odd machines and running into the wind with nothing but hope and canvas. It took a belief in the possible, that maybe, just maybe, we too could rise. And rise we did. We floated in balloons, soared in jets, hovered in helicopters, and tumbled weightless in orbit. We've carried cameras, telescopes, supplies, and dreams into the sky. We've dropped seeds, delivered aid, mapped glaciers, and looked down on the clouds we used to only imagine. Every flight, in its own way, tells a story of problem solving, of persistence, of reaching out, and not letting gravity be the final word. Even now, as flight becomes more familiar, more routine, it hasn't lost its magic. A a quiet early morning flight, the first launch of a new rocket, a hummingbird hovering at your window, the sheer improbability of something heavier than air rising gently from a runway and vanishing into the sky. These are moments that don't need explanation. They simply invite us to feel wonder. And so, here at the end of our journey through the science of flight, from birds to rockets, from flapping wings to reusable boosters, we return to where we began. To the simple act of looking up. Where are you watching from tonight? And what time is it in your part of the world? Are you under a midnight sky filled with stars? Or is it early morning with the soft sound of birds just beginning to stir? Maybe you're winding down from a busy day, or lying in bed, letting your thoughts drift upward like a leaf caught in a breeze. Wherever you are, whatever the hour, thank you for spending this time here with me. If you enjoyed this quiet journey through the skies, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a like or even subscribe to The Sleepy Scientist for more gentle explorations like this one. I always love hearing from you, so let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is as you begin to close your eyes. And if you're still awake, gently drifting, I hope the wonder of flight, its history, its science, its beauty, has left a soft imprint on your imagination. Whether you dream of gliding through clouds, soaring over oceans, or simply watching the horizon tilt as wings catch the wind, may your sleep tonight carry you somewhere light and boundless. As always, this video is for entertainment and relaxation only, and is not intended to provide any medical advice. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.